Last Select Board public hearing meeting, the Planning Commission got together and we had a couple of action items, so I thought I would provide sort of a follow-up on our action items along with a little bit of background for what's included in today's packet. So largely we were going to go sort of re-examine a couple of items in both what we're calling Rural 10 and Rural 5, which are today's vernacular conservation residential in R120. And a couple of things we thought about when we took it back. We feel really that there could be a certain amount of confusion just in general about what we're trying to accomplish with the density-based zoning. And part of that confusion is, our own doing, I'll say. When people think of density-based zoning, they immediately think of more density. And that's really a model that we were encouraging in the village center areas. So there's been a lot of a discussion about that. We have actually increased density quite a bit in the village areas that are served by infrastructure. And then I guess, unfortunately, we translated some of that same terminology when we went into the rural districts, but what we really meant was low-density-based rural zoning. So we authored, thanks to Jason and also Preston, a statement that actually does a little better job describing what we're actually trying to accomplish. And I think probably the most important thing, and that's probably the first thing that was in your packet, was this statement. And I think the most important part of the statement is the first sentence, which is in bold. And I think it's really important to call out that we're actually decreasing the density of development in both what used to be R120 and conservation residential. We're reducing it 40% in R120 and 50% in conservation residential. So, did you get this?
This is what we got.
No, we didn't, nobody got that.
No, I didn't get that. I got this, which is the executive, this is what was attached to the email that you sent me.
Yeah, nobody has any of the packet.
Okay.
I did what was emailed.
Okay, so then I guess verbally there was only, can you make copies of this? Yeah.
Maybe I missed something.
No,
That's what you meant. I thought you meant you didn't get this. You didn't clarify.
yeah, I thought I sent something else. Yeah.
Hunted from you, because it
That's
was a
okay.
rainy Sunday,
We
we
will,
weren't happy.
no, because I worked into
Ready to go?
so we will.
Yeah, so I must have, I'll have,
It's okay.
yeah, I sent you the wrong attachment then.
No worries.
Yeah.
Documents, that's all. Preston's making copies.
I could ask if they could make a couple
Yep,
copies.
we'll get copies for everybody. Yep.
Brief pause. Any more knock-knock, Joe?
Yeah.
I have enough copies to give the select board right now, and then I'll make copies for the audience.
Thank you, Preston.
Somebody, okay.
Thank you. I'll make it right. Is there more than just this?
There is, but I can speak to it because it was really some detailed language, but I'll just describe what we changed. And my apologies for not getting the right material out, so we're going to take a little bit of, give you guys a minute to read it. Thankfully, it's only one page. But I think it's important for folks to take the time to skim through this, to try to clarify exactly what we're doing.
changes you made in conservation? We don't have those either.
Talk to those. It's pretty straightforward. This,
Okay.
Do you want to start explaining this?
yeah, I can, thank you, Preston.
Yeah, no problem.
So basically, again, we put this together to try to help just clarify maybe some confusion about the terminology. And ultimately, our goals are fairly straightforward. In the rural districts, we're actually trying to reduce the density of development, while at the same time providing some additional flexibility for landowners to get the best and highest use out of their property. And why are we doing this? Part of it is to basically the current zoning in both R120 and conservation residential sort of allow for a higher level of development in what some people would call forest and farm fragmentation. And also, some people refer to it as, urban sprawl or rural sprawl. So you've got larger lot sizes, and people pepper their houses all around on these large, lots. And that's really sort of not something we're trying to continue to promote. What we're really trying to do is maintain larger blocks of open space. So we're reducing density, while at the same time allowing landowners some flexibility with the property they have in terms of suitability. Not every piece of property is ideal in every way, shape, or form for development. So we're trying to give folks that have property the ability to take advantage of the parts of the property that are ideal for development, while at the same time reducing the overall density of development in those areas. So at a high level, that's the goal, and that's what the proposal that we've written accomplishes. So I thought there was just some clarity that we needed to create around that. And so let me stop for a minute to see if there's any questions about that before I move on to the next piece.
If I could ask a couple of questions. One is there any driver from the state that's pushing us in this direction?
I think I'll let Jason kind of address that, because you probably have a better, I'm going to say there is, but you probably have a better.
I guess it depends on which version of the state you're thinking about. I think so. Partly yes. Fish and Wildlife, for example, have been talking about this fragmentation issue for many years, and they recognize things like 3-acre minimum lot sizes really just carve up the land, and so we're trying to really promote again some more flexibility, but have a lower density overall. And that's sort of in keeping with what the Fish and Wildlife Department folks are saying, and now some of the land use planning laws are. I wouldn't say they're calling for density-based zoning necessarily, but they want to see less fragmentation. So I think it is in concert with those pieces.
So is there an issue with right now with fragmentation? I mean, is it preventing population, wildlife populations from moving, or is it just a future preventative?
It's definitely a problem, whether it's specifically a problem in Chester or in parts of Chester, I can't say, but it's definitely a problem statewide or in parts of the state. And it is something that we're taking a look at. The Planning Commission was looking at large blocks of forest land, which are more likely to have biodiversity and things like that, connections in between those, and the zoning map is trying to reflect those things so that there's more wildlife and places for hunting and other things like that. So, I mean, there's a range of goals that we're, I think, trying to achieve with this.
So is topography accounted for in these decisions? As an example, I know the property that I own, a lot of it is unbuildable. And so if we're talking about fragmentation, I would say that wildlife could easily cross my property without running into any development or anything, because I can't build on a lot of that property. So I'm just wondering if that was taken into account when we're developing these proposed bylaws, to say, okay, if you have a certain number of buildable acres, is that taken into account?
I'd like to say that we did take that into consideration, maybe not explicitly, but I don't know, Hugh, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, it's kind of a compliment to what you're saying in one way. On the one hand, it's true because many parts are sort of unbuildable. It creates some large open spaces that represent places that wildlife could move through. At the same time, understanding that that's a reality for the property or the land in Chester, we also wanted to create a model that would allow landowners some flexibility to use the land that's better for building. So if you have a large piece of land and a lot of it's unusable or unbuildable, you can take advantage of the parts of the land that are suitable for buildable. You can take advantage of those areas more so if you're not bound by a large minimum lot size restriction.
That
So-
seems a little counterproductive from a standpoint of low density, because you have a certain area that has a high density of buildings, but the overall density of the parcel of that particular plot of land, area of land, is low density. I understand where you're
So-
going, but I'm just curious.
Well, no, and you're bringing up a good point, and I agree with that. I think the sort of the flip side of that is, in other areas where there's large parcels that are possibly buildable, you'd rather see, rather than one house scattered every 10 or 15 acres, it would be better to have a cluster of houses in a smaller amount of acreage in much more open space.
Why
So-
is that?
Well, just because as soon as you start creating that sort of patchwork of single dwellings on very large lots, then that's basically part of the fragmentation problem we're trying to solve for. And it drives up, basically, at the end of the day, it drives up the cost of, everything associated with living, infrastructure, roads, private driveways, all of those kinds of things. So
Yeah,
we're not
I guess-
precluding it, but we don't want that to be a requirement.
Well, I guess I'm not seeing really the driver behind this. I understand what you just said,
Yep.
but for me, I live on 80 acres, thereabouts. I don't want to see my neighbors. And my house is in an area that's marginally buildable, but because of that, if I had a neighbor that had, 25 acres, they could theoretically divide it into 3 or 4 or 5 lots, depending on where it is. And then I'd see a whole bunch of houses. Whereas if my house is in the middle of my 80 acres, I'm not gonna be able to see anybody. So I guess I understand, the rationale that you presented. But
Yeah.
I'm not seeing, number one, I'm not seeing a real urgent driver for it right now, because I don't think this is an issue that we have here in Chester. And number two, I'm not sure that I agree with the premise of your conclusions.
In what, so let me address the first thing first. Yeah, we're not saying that we actually see a burning problem that needs to be solved, but the work we do isn't about solving for the burning problems, because if that were to be true, we wouldn't really have to do anything, because things don't change around here that much. So we do solve for burning problems, but we're also sort of looking to the future to say, you know, in 5 years or 10 years, you know, how should we be evolving land use? So part of it's, is there a problem that needs to be solved immediately? And part of it is, what should we be doing looking to the future? So let me say that first. And then as far as, you know, I think the other thing that's important for everybody to keep in mind, at least at some level, is everybody looks at change and tries to figure out, you know, what's the worst case scenario. And you can kind of drum up a lot of different scenarios that are sort of doomsday. At the end of the day, those doomsday scenarios almost never come to be, for a lot of different reasons. So I think there needs to be a measure of, you know, thought about that. And I think in your example, with the changes we're making, there's less likelihood for your neighbor to subdivide his property and create houses right next to your land. Because even if he does that, there'll be less houses. There won't be more houses. There'll be less houses.
I guess, okay, I'll have to think about that and do
Yeah.
the math on that. But I guess the last question, I apologize for taking up all of
No,
it.
no, it's
The last
good.
question is, have you considered the unintended consequences of this particular change?
Well, I mean, as part of the process of coming up with this recommendation, we did a lot. We tried to imagine all of the different sorts of scenarios. And I don't think we viewed any of the scenarios that we contemplated to be any more dire than anything that's probably currently doable in those districts right now with the current zoning.
Thank you.
So any more questions on that? I do have a couple other things that are related to the takeaways, so I want to make sure that that we get to those. Ariana?
I do, thank you for this. It's a reiteration of what we discussed in the last hearing. It all makes perfect sense. I sort of had the same question I had last time. So I actually agree with the philosophy. I like the direction it's going. I think it makes perfect sense. So the same question I had last time, which is, if you were to include a minimum lot size within everything you've got here,
Mm-hmm.
so a minimum lot size for those smaller lots, what do you lose?
Nothing, and that's a great segue into pretty much the second part of our takeaways. So we had this discussion about what's the, you know, practically speaking, with all things considered, related to frontage, setbacks, wastewater, drinking water, what it really is, sort of a practical minimum lot size. So I did consult with a local septic designer, a certified septic designer who does a lot of work in Chester, and I asked these questions, and he basically said, in a perfect world, on a perfect piece of land, you can meet all the Vermont wastewater requirements on about between an acre and an acre and a half. So with that being said, that restriction, along with just frontage and setbacks, we sort of concluded that there's really no downside to creating a minimum lot size within this density-based approach of 2 acres. So part of the thing that Preston just handed out was the changes to our language that would basically make, in those areas for what we're calling rural 5 and rural 10, a 2 acre minimum lot size.
Oh, great. Okay.
And that was based on, I mean, I think originally, we came in without that minimum lot size recommendation primarily because we felt that the land and the physical constraints will drive that requirement without us having to write it down. But at the end of the day, you know, there's the net result, the net outcome is the same. So, you know, and we sort of validated that with the discussions we had with the septic designer, and just, you know, making some drawings of different houses on lots with setbacks and, you know, the well from the leach field, from the property line, and so at the end of the day, 2 acres is probably a good number.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question. Is there any stipulation in here that the septic and water need to be on that designated lot?
There is not.
Okay, so there's still, as exists in the current zoning,
Mhm.
there's latitude for people's septic to be on, not on their own lot.
Correct.
Okay, that's the unforeseen circumstances that scares me as an individual and a homeowner. So that's the piece that I still, but apparently we've all lived with it for 100 years. So unforeseen future circumstances, to me, it's concerning that people who may have owned 80 acres for years and years can suddenly divide it up. Does that mean we've got people with septic in the wrong property and all that stuff? And I'm not inviting a whole new discussion, but I am raising it as, does that bother anyone else? Or are we all okay with zoning where it doesn't, where your septic can be not on your, contained in your own property?
When I had a discussion with the state officer, I forget the gentleman's name and stuff, we talked about it. It wasn't really a matter of land and land size, if you were gonna do shared septics or crossing someone else's land. All those things seemed possible. They weren't probable, because he said it would be a legal problem more than it would be a size problem or a septic problem. You'd have to have covenants in place and regulations in place and everything spelled out legally to have those easements to share that septic or share the well or whatever else was going on. So even with, no matter what we have as far as zoning goes, that is still possible anywhere. But what holds back on it a lot, and I think what would stop a lot of that, is the legal part of it, because a lot of people don't want to encumber their land with right-of-ways or share this or share that or anything, because it starts infringing on the value of the land and the possession that you have. When I look at the regulations, these last ones that you brought forward and stuff, I thought you were accomplishing everything that we kind of were looking for, because part of the discussion at a state level was also more affordable housing. So if you happen to have a little area that you might have a cluster of houses, and to me, a cluster of houses in Vermont altogether seems like a village to me. And you drive through Vermont and you come to a cluster of houses that happen to be together, and they're there for a reason, because they found land that made sense to have a cluster of houses with a small center, and that's how they developed, and that's where they were. I don't think there's that many lots like that available still, especially in our area of the state, because of the topography and stuff. There might be in other areas where I think it might be an issue and stuff, but I think you're accomplishing having a little more affordable housing. That's possible because of the flexibility in the zoning regulation. And the caveat is that it's actually less overall density, because you might have your little cluster, but now you have to have a lot more area around there that has to be left open and left alone. So your fragmentation is going to happen in one area where you might have a small cluster of houses, as opposed to, well, you go up into the hills sometimes and all you see is McMansions everywhere, and outbuildings and pools and tennis courts and driveways and everything else. And I think that's a bigger fragmentation than it is than having a small cluster of houses. And I think what you were saying about the limitations on the septic, I mean, around here, that's going to be a huge factor. And if you can get it on 2 acres, I think you're lucky. I think it's probably more like 2 to 4 or even more sometimes, depending on what's going on.
Well, and let me just share, while we're on that topic, let me share a little more context about the discussion I had. It was with Brian Rapinati, and he was actually in favor conceptually of this approach, because he said in some cases, it would allow me to get a system in on a lot that, you know, if you're looking at a piece of land, you might be able to get one more lot in, if you didn't have to meet, you know, like a strict 5 or 10 acre minimum lot size. You could get it, you could quote, get it done. He was actually also in favor of a minimum lot size because some of what he's finding is 25% of the work he does now is with basically accessory dwelling units and this notion of what I'll call, you know, almost like the notion of the family compound where you have a house and maybe you have some tiny houses or some other dwellings. Sometimes those are being put in on shared septic systems, you know, because it's a family compound, if you will. But at the end of the day, you know, when the family compound breaks up, you want to make sure there's enough land underneath each one of those dwellings to support its own system. If you have to break away from the shared system. So he felt having something like a 2 acre minimum would provide that backstop to prevent a future scenario where somebody dropped a tiny house on a 1/4 acre lot because they were hooked up to their family's shared system. And then all of a sudden, you know, the family breaks up and you want to take that tiny house in that lot and have it stand alone. You know, if you didn't have a minimum lot size requirement, then that would be more difficult. So just sharing that.
Any more questions or concerns about the changes in the bylaws as presented?
So I have
You gotta get the microphone. Here you go, Derek.
I need the microphone.
Well, this is not a good sign. So I actually have a bit to say, but before I go into what I really want to say, the changes that have been proposed that we have just received tonight, are those going to be under consideration when you adopt these regs, or are you going to rewarn the whole thing because this is a change and now people will not necessarily be aware that this change has been made and it needs to be discussed?
Yeah, that's a discussion that we had before about minor changes and major changes, and I would think this would be a major change.
I would defer to them to respond to that, because they have done a little bit of research.
Yeah, so we did have that discussion. We did have that discussion, and you'll probably notice there is no agenda item to adopt the bylaws tonight. So regardless of what happens tonight, the game plan effectively is to close the public hearing, rewarn another public hearing with the content of what we're discussing tonight.
And I'll take that back.
Yeah, okay.
And I agree, that is seemingly to me the more appropriate way to do it. So, in things that I had wished to say, I still am having a instinctual and visceral dislike of the lack of minimum lot size, even though we are now potentially putting in a small lot size. I just feel that in 10, 20, 30 years, when all this has a chance to actually cook for a while, we're going to see some unintended consequences that we don't care for. I also noticed that potentially there's not a lot of towns in Vermont who have adopted this new way of doing business. In fact, I think at this point I only know of 2. And if it is such the new way of doing business, I hope we're not trying to be first and be experimental while the rest of the state figures out whether it likes this or not. This is a big change. I noticed in the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting this past Thursday, the special meeting, and they put out their minutes very quickly, which is terrific, that there was a discussion from Barry that Derek would approve of this 2-acre lot minimum. Now, why that came up, I have no idea. I do not care for somebody representing my viewpoints unless they come from me. That's hearsay, not a good place. And as a matter of fact, I appreciate the change to the 2-acre minimum. However, that is not what I would have approved of. Specifically, in the R10, I would have hoped to have seen a 3 to 4 acre size. And in the R5, I would have expected to see a 3-acre size. What that does in the R10 is while you are having the density, which I agree with, you are also having the minimum lot size, which is currently 5 acres, down to something less, but still maintaining it so you get some elbow room. And R5 would be essentially unchanged from what it currently is, where we wouldn't be improving or changing anything. I wish I had had an opportunity to hear what Brian Rapinati had said directly and closely. His input would have been valuable. So we don't really have a chance to question him on what he had to say. I don't know how to feel about that. The statement was just made about peppering houses around large lots. In a way, I kind of sort of want that. I'm very much with Lee in the fact that I don't care to see my neighbors. There are plenty of houses, and I do see them, and I see lights, and I see lots of activities. However, I don't have to observe somebody sunbathing in the backyard, nor have them observe me, which I don't know which one is worse. So I'm not into this cluster thing. There are places where clusters are fine. But not as a general way of doing business. Also tying it into another comment from just earlier now was we have in our ADUs, we can put in one accessory dwelling unit and have a second one also be applied for and not have to go through the conditional use process, if I remember things correctly.
You need to go through conditional use for the second ADU.
You need a microphone.
Okay, so I'll repeat it. Hugh says that we don't need to go through the conditional use for the second unit. Well, we do need to go, I'm sorry. So with the concept that we're a little short on housing in the state, it strikes me that a larger lot, the 3 to 4 acres in R10, 3 acres in R5, might be more conducive to putting in an ADU. Or the second one. You have the room. You try to squeeze an ADU on a smaller lot, I think it gets a little harder. Not that I necessarily know how this works. So my bottom line is that I am not generally in favor of minimum density zoning as we have it. I would prefer to see minimum lot sizes. If we do have to have minimum density zoning, which I do understand why we're doing that, I would prefer to see it with a lot size of 3 to 4 acres, as much as you can tolerate in R10, and not to speak for the people who live in R5, but I would like to have you consider or have them consider at least 3 acres in that area. And I believe that terminates what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
Who wants it?
Does anyone else want to speak to this matter at this hearing?
I have a letter I can read as well.
On the microphone, maybe?
And, if it's okay, I'd like to sit at the table again, so I can have my hands free.
Can you grab your, yeah, it was not enough.
Let's see. Good evening, Select Board members and the Town Manager. Last Wednesday, the Planning Commission met and voted to reinstate a minimum lot size in the R120 and the Conservation Residential District. This is a step in the right direction, but it should be returned to the original 3-acre minimum. The setback standards worked perfectly fine as they were. People want space around them, and it maintains a rural countryside, which is the goal of the town plan. Goal number 1 of the town plan is to encourage development so as to maintain the existing settlement pattern of compact village centers separated by rural countryside. Some of recommendation number 1 under that goal is intensive residential development should be encouraged only in areas of town serviced by sewer and water. Strip development along the highways should be discouraged. Recommendation number 7, development should be consistent with the existing density pattern of the area and consistent with a historic rate of growth. Recommendation number 8, growth and development should occur at a rate which does not undermine the taxpayer's ability to support the town on a sound financial basis. I understand from reading the Chester Planning Commission minutes from last Wednesday, a week ago, and watching the Zoom meeting, that they are now proposing a 2-acre minimum lot size in the R120, when it used to be 3, and a 2-acre minimum lot size in the Conservation Residential, when it used to be 5 acres. I'm trying to understand why the Regional Planning Commission is proposing density-based zoning and reducing the minimum lot size when 3 and 5 acres has worked perfectly well for the 2 rural districts. I'm also curious where this directive for density-based zoning is coming from, as it's not coming from the state. And I was also be curious to know if anyone knows if there are other towns where this idea of density-based zoning has been approved in rural Vermont. To build one home on a back road in Vermont and get all the necessary permits in hand, a low-ball cost is $400,000 and up. Rural districts are not areas where affordable housing is supposed to be developed. The Home Act of 2023 notes that affordable housing is needed and is supposed to be placed in areas of town served by municipal water and sewer. Density-based zoning in the rural districts, which cover roughly 90% of the town, or 45 square miles of Chester, is not smart growth. And to do it when it has not been really tested in other areas of the state, other rural areas of the state, is an unwise gamble. If a person owns 20, 40, 60, or even 180 acres, and they want to develop their land or do a cluster development, they can go through the planned unit development, otherwise known as PUD process, which is overseen by the DRB and has a more thorough review, performance standards that are also required to be met on a case-by-case basis. If the goal is to create wildlife corridors and provide flexibility, a PUD is a stronger way to achieve that result, and it is unlikely to result in an administrative headache, which is what Jason Rasmussen has called this type of density-based zoning in a letter from January of this 2024. Density-based zoning of 2-acre lots across 90% of the town's rural area is not consistent with smart growth principles and does not appear to have been driven by public need or public desire. Have people attended the Planning Commission meetings since January when they started to look at the rural districts? And have they asked the Planning Commission to eliminate lot sizes or to make minimum lot sizes smaller? I read the minutes and I didn't come across any such requests. When I read the Planning Commission minutes going back all the way to January 2024, the public posed concerns and valid questions. In fact, many of the same questions we are considering tonight and asking tonight. Some of the important questions were not really answered. The Planning Commission is supposed to, quote, encourage citizen participation at all levels of the planning process and to assure that decisions shall be made at the most local level possible, commensurate with their impact. The easiest thing to do is put the pages back in that give the minimum lot sizes and frontage setback standards that have been in the rural areas for years, and then add the proposed permitted and conditional uses that they would like to add. And here I just have two examples of what the minimum lot size was previously in the R120, as well as the minimum lot frontage, all the setbacks, same with what it used to be in the conservation residential. And I just took that from the original bylaws. Currently, we live in a state that floods. We live in a town with rural areas and roadways that flood and wash away. We live in a time of global climate change. Large storms are becoming more and more common. In fact, actually, since we met in the last month, we've seen two massive storms, Helene and Milton? Okay. And that's just in the past month. Vermont is susceptible to flooding, and many of the roadways run along rivers. We have culverts and bridges that are in constant need of upkeep. Chester has rivers and brooks that flood: the Williams River, Whitmore Brook, Lover's Lane Brook, Middle Branch Williams River, South Branch Williams River, Hall Brook, etc., all flood. And not only do these rivers flood in the rural areas and back roads, they also converge and flood the more densely populated areas of the downtown of Chester. In conclusion, it is important to carefully study the big picture, look at the build-out scenarios, take into account all the rivers, the current use overlay, map, follow the town plan, and follow Vermont's smart growth principles. Density-based zoning is not what is best for Chester, and the adverse impacts have not been considered or addressed. The town has done what was needed from the state's perspective to meet the Vermont Home Act by increasing density in the town center and surrounding areas served by sewer and water. Those changes were supported by smart growth principles. If the town wants to incorporate density-based zoning, they could maintain a 3-acre minimum lot size with water and septic on each individual lot. Language could be written into the bylaws to require each lot to have their own well and their own septic, which would provide clarity for all new development. And I strongly feel that it should not be the DRB's, Development Review Board's, responsibility to enforce this each time a subdivision review comes before them. Planned unit developments would be a way for landowners to cluster development while also maintaining open space. And I strongly feel that 2 acres is too small, and I ask the Select Board and the Planning Commission to maintain the rural areas by keeping minimum lot sizes and setback requirements in the rural districts as they were. If it isn't broken, then why change it? I sincerely appreciate your careful consideration, and I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just request that this letter be attached to the minutes. Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else that has any comments or concerns at tonight's hearing? There will be another hearing in the future to air your opinions and your ideas with the changes that come forward. Preston?
Because it sounds like you're thinking of closing this hearing, I don't want to have us advertise another hearing for a vote just to be failed because you're not comfortable with what the Planning Commission brings forward. So, I mean, is it the sense of the board that you'd rather just not do density-based, just go back to what we've always done in the past? Because if that's the sense, and I think that's what I imagine that's what we would do.
What is the consensus of the board? Would they be willing to approve these regulations as they stand? Or are we looking at something totally different as far as having no density standards?
We've had 2 residents identify discomfort with it, but a willingness to accept it with greater lot sizes in those minimums. So I don't think it's I don't think it's a bathwater situation yet, but that's a question back to the planning committee. Is it worth it for you to explore the concept while supporting the historical desire for larger lot sizes within the concept of those 80-acre lot, where you can get 4 or 5 in one small place idea? So I guess that's my question. Is there room to continue to evolve or not?
Because we're effectively talking still in these rural areas about fairly small lot sizes, R10, R5, continuing to increase the minimum lot size within that construct is, in my opinion, reduces the benefit of a density-based approach. So if we think we want, in my opinion is, if we were to think it makes sense to increase the minimum lot sizes, first of all, the minimum lot size in R120 already is 3, so it's like a do-nothing for that. And going from 2 to 4 in what would be R10, it may make sense to just go back to larger fixed minimum lot sizes in both those districts. I mean, for me, to Preston's point, the Planning Commission's goal is to get this job done. Okay, so if the town feels they're not really ready for density-based, or what I'll call low-density-based zoning in rural areas, that's perfectly fine. We want to make sure we can put forth a recommendation at the next public hearing that will have a high likelihood of being adopted. I think the only other thing I will say is, I think Derek mentioned this, and Preston was able to do some research, and there are 2 other towns in Vermont, Waitsfield and Bristol, that have implemented density-based zoning. East Montpelier is considering it, but yeah, of all of the towns in Vermont, it's not a very large number of people that are doing it or considering it. So, if Chester doesn't want to, go in that direction, I think you just need to give the Planning Commission some guidance so that we can bring something back that will work.
Well, yeah, I've been quiet through this whole thing so far. I am a proponent of density-based zoning. I think back to the survey that we took, we got to every property owner in the town about a year ago. I think it was a year ago. And overwhelmingly, I think 72%, I'm going from memory here, I could pull up the spreadsheet with the graphs on it. The overwhelming consensus was people want to maintain the rural character of Chester. That's the quality of life point that is the most important to them. And what I'm hearing from the folks who are objecting to this tonight is that they also want to maintain that rural character. And I wonder if still there's a lack of complete understanding about what impact this might have over the long term. And because it's clear to me, but I have to go back to 4 years ago when this concept first was brought to the Planning Commission by a consultant for density-based zoning. It took me quite a while to get my head wrapped around it. And I know I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, or the brightest bulb on the tree, or whichever metaphor you want to use, but it took me a while to really understand it. Once I did, I was a strong proponent of it. Because what will happen is, if we see, and this is a big if we see a rash of development in Chester, which we have yet to see, although we would like to promote more housing, especially in the village area, every time a subdivision happens later, a piece of property, a larger piece of property, is subject to be conserved. I'm also an amateur ecologist and have been my whole life, and one of the things that I value most about Vermont in general, and especially in Chester, is our large wooded areas. I think it's important that we conserve those in perpetuity, and not just for the aesthetics of it. There's, logging industry, there's hunting, there's backpacking, there's mountain biking. It's a huge thing now. Hiking, Chester's got a great hiking system, trail system. And I think that it's important for us, and not to mention the wildlife. Nobody really has mentioned that in depth, but wildlife needs large blocks of land. Every one of us has seen stories about bear intrusions, and if you're on social media, every time a bear walks into town someplace, it's all over the place. And, the bears are getting named, and we're encroaching on wildlife habitat now. And that wildlife needs a place to live. If we fragment, if we stay a minimum, so let's go to the other scenario, we stay a minimum lot sizes, and whether it's 3 or 5 or whatever people decide they're comfortable with, somebody wants to divide a 100-acre piece of land, it's going to be 10-acre lots with houses on them. So that's heavily fragmented versus this plan, where those homes can be on the more buildable areas, and the rest of that land is effectively conserved. So I think that this plan really, if everybody can get their head around it, and I'm okay with the 2-acre minimum. I think that's a good compromise from where we were at our last meeting. I think if everybody can get their head around what this really means, is it's best for the town in the long run. And this is just kind of a little aside story. You may have seen there was a story in the news where they uncovered 50 preserved Viking-age skeletons in, no, nobody saw that story? Okay, I read weird news. In Denmark. And it was an important discovery because these are from like 700 AD, these skeletons. And I wanted to see what the town was in Denmark, because I'm not that familiar with Europe, so I pulled up Google Maps and I put in the satellite view, and the first thing that hit me was, here's a town, and all around it are farming fields and woodlots, and Europe has done a fabulous job. I don't know if they've done it with zoning or how they've done it, but they've conserved the village with the rural character outside. There's probably somebody calling in support of my soliloquy here. So, that said, I know that was a long statement, but I fully support the density-based zoning concept. I think it's what's best for the town over the long run. When I sat on the planning commission, when I was first appointed, I thought, what should be my core beliefs, my grounding principle here? And I settled on try to look 50 years into the future. Which, can you really do that? No. You can think worst case scenarios, but you can also think best case scenarios. And to me, the best case scenario is for Chester to not look a whole lot different 50 years from now than it does now when you're driving down the highway and you look up on the hillside. And we can all think of places where houses have been built in what I thought were unbuildable areas. You see houses hanging off the mountainside in some places. If people have enough money, they can build a house anywhere they want to. So all that to say, I am fully in support of the proposed changes to the rural districts as amended, as being proposed to be amended by the Planning Commission at this time.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so,
I had just a couple of comments. The first one being, will there be another planning commission meeting before the new noticed meeting? Where we could ask more questions, because I think the planning commission has a lot more work to do in the rural districts. For instance, the change from residential 120 3-acre minimum to rural 5-acre minimum presents some interesting scenarios for someone with let's say, more than 6 acres, but less than 10. I mean, as it stands now, you have the possibility of 2 acres, but if you have less than 10 under the new rules, you would just have the possibility of 1 buildable lot. So that sounds like a taking to me. I also had some other comments. The proposed residential, sorry, I get nervous. The proposed residential 2, which is, I think I referenced it last time, the going up Trebo Road and along 103 and then out Route 10 to Gassets, which is, I think, called Residential 2. Previously, all 120, R120. I don't think that's been given enough consideration or public input. At the last meeting, the answer to why this change was, the answer was that it looked like a good area for residential. Well, I've driven around. It looks pretty residential already. It's developing at a nice organic rate. It just seems like you're going to invite speculators if you go to this R residential 2. And I just don't think there's been enough public outreach to those residents in those areas. I've talked to people and they haven't heard anything about it. And maybe, some more planning commission outreach to the public would help with that particular part. And I've noticed I've read through the minutes, there really wasn't a lot of discussion about those changes, the purple area, if you know what I'm referencing on the map. So that's my nervous comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
Before we move on, I just want to make sure that there's no one else in the audience that wants to speak, because once we start speaking as a select board, I'm going to turn off the comments from the public. So, Amy, you just read a 3-page letter, so we have the gist of where you're going with this. We're going to discuss this as a select board right now, so they can get some direction when they go forward with the planning commission. Peter, go ahead.
Okay, so I've been involved with development my whole life, and the thing is, for 20 years, 3-acre minimum was kind of the way that you looked at it for sewer and water. And I have not seen the miracle sewer system that takes less space. So to move it down, I mean, we have one comment from a developer who says, well, at the meeting you said 1.5 to 2 acres, and just now you said something else. But the thing is, it was at a 3-acre minimum. Was the reason for that was you had a place for well and you had a place for water, and that worked there, and that has worked. I haven't seen any problem with that. So that has worked really well, and we know that it works. So going to a 2-acre, and then in particularly, I unfortunately have been involved in several shared sewer systems, people who have asked me for help, and it's not like sharing a driveway. It's not at all like sharing a driveway. So I would really think that the minimum that you can go to is 3 acres.
Did you say 2?
3.
Peter, does that imply that even the low-density zone housing, whatever we're calling this, but with a 3-acre minimum, is something that you would contemplate?
Well, the 3-acre, see, that was the state stamp, and that worked. And if you look at things that have been developed, that actually worked pretty well everywhere. It's been we've done in Chester for years. You're shaking your head, you're saying it didn't work.
I'm sorry, I'm watching Sapa mess
Oh.
with the camera. It's irritating me.
Okay, sorry.
So if
No.
it's not to you, I didn't realize
Yeah.
I was wearing it.
Peter,
There we go. Now
Go ahead.
I have a question, Peter. Sorry, Ariana. Okay. So I do respect the fact that you've been in development and seen a lot of changes here in Chester and sat on the DRB and overseen a lot of that. Is it common practice when somebody's going to, I mean, I used to see tests all over the place when people were going, what do they call it?
Perk test.
Perk test.
Yeah.
Is that a common practice before somebody subdivides
It has to
land?
be.
Okay, so
And
then,
you have to do a perk test before you can subdivide, or
Okay.
it's listed on the plat that that you've waived your development rights.
Okay.
And so you have parcels that have their development rights.
okay, so with that in mind, why would anybody develop a 2-acre lot or carve out a 2-acre lot if it wasn't going to perk for septic?
'Cause you can put
Isn't it,
well-
isn't it
Well,
self-regulating
I have
then?
No, I have signed my name on subdivisions as a DRB member where the septic is not on the same lot.
That happens not often, but there are regulations for that in place. The state lets you have up to 25 people in a cluster where they do an inspection, whether it's shared well or shared
Well,
septic.
you can do that on
and it's-
PDU.
And it's one and done, and it's over with, and then they don't come back, so there's not like a whole bunch of regulation and stuff. So that's already in place, and the biggest item that the state's septic inspector for this area said was the legal part of it, if you're gonna be doing anything as far as shared goes. And like you said, it's a nightmare depending on how it works with, who owns land, who's gonna repair it, who's gonna do it. It is possible. And he also said, under ideal conditions, which there's very few lots like that in Chester, you could probably get away with an acre and a half, the minimum that he's ever seen to put in a well and a septic on not a tiny house, but a regular house size, 1,500 square feet or something, was about an acre and a half. 2 acres, yeah, maybe 3 acres if you had to. So those little discrepancies that we're talking about, I don't think they're gonna play that much in the scheme of things as far as what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that's more important than these ideas about, well, it's 3 acres, it's 2 acres, or whatever. I think a lot of it's gonna be regulated by the land, no matter what we say or do. And I think that some of the goals that we're trying to attain here, which is less fragmentation, I think you get more fragmentation from 5-acre and 10-acre lots scattered out in all different areas than you do from a small cluster that is surrounded by more protected land. So now your 4 or 5 houses aren't spread over 50 acres because it's 10 acres. They could be spread over 10 acres just in the center of the village and have 100 acres all around it that are preserved. And that's the part that took me a while to wrap my head around too. So what we're trying to accomplish, I think we all agree about trying to preserve the rural character of Vermont. We all want what we feel is best for the state and for our town and things, and we're just looking at it through different eyes and stuff. Planning Commission went through a lot of work and took a lot of input on all these discussions that they had. It wasn't just decided over the last month or two. It was done over the course of 2 years, and a lot of times this is what happens until the end comes and the definite part of it are on paper that people react to it and stuff instead of being a little more involved with the process. And that's not saying, against someone or not, or it's just the way it is. Because until it's on paper, until you have a law or regulation, it could change and things can happen. So I think what we're trying to accomplish is worthy, and I think I would agree and go with what's been presented with that 2-acre minimum that Ariana was saying, which is included in that. That's my thought. We just have to come up as a board with a consensus to guide the Planning Commission to go forward, so that they don't go forward and come back, and like they said, and then we're just gonna disagree with it. And if we need another meeting, just as the select board, to discuss this a little more, to come out, because we've already been on it a lot longer than I thought we were gonna be. And I don't like cutting people short, and I'm sorry, and anybody else that wants to talk on this issue, but I don't know, maybe do we need another meeting for this, to discuss it further, unless we can come to a consensus as a board?
I'd like to make one comment which isn't going to push us closer to consensus. Just in listening to everyone and everything, typically when we are faced with a decision to make, there's either a financial or there's something that's pretty black and white for us to look at the impact. I just want to go on the record as saying, what we're discussing, maintaining the rural nature of a town, these are opinions. We have completely legitimate, respectable members of the community who feel strongly that keeping it the way it is the way to retain the rural character. And we have absolutely legitimate, well-researched, well-thought-out plans and opinions about another approach to keeping the rural character. So I do want to go on the record as saying this isn't just what's right and what's wrong, or even what's best and what's not. It's that this community feels very strongly in two different ways. And I don't think anyone is actually wrong. So I think it's actually harder for us to come to a conclusion, because at this point, it's truly, feels like it's opinions. We haven't heard or seen anything that says it will cost the town $1 million if we do this, but only $500,000 if we do that. Like normally, when we're addressing something, we can look at something tangible, and we can't. So I just want to put on the table that it's not just thumbs up or thumbs down.
I would just interject one thing, is that we have brought in experts in
Yeah.
zoning and planning that have recommended this approach.
Yep.
So I'm going to drag the meeting out a few more minutes. Say my 2 cents. I appreciate all the work that you folks have done, the Planning Commission, Jason, and everybody who's had input into this question. I still am not seeing the value of changing things at this point. It doesn't seem like it's not working, and it doesn't seem like this is something that's being driven by the citizenry of Chester. Maybe I'm totally out to lunch in this, but it sounds like the state is pushing the agenda here, and we're not necessarily, as a community, all that anxious to do what the state wants us to do. At least that's my opinion. You know, I think there's value to both sides. If this came to a vote and it's like you either vote for the previous presentation or the 2-acre minimum, I'd probably go with the 2-acre, but I still am not seeing the value of changing it at all. So that's my opinion. Relative to something you said, Tim, about, you know, these giant houses going up, I mean, that could happen with this regardless of which way we go, because you don't have lack of funds, and you could put a big house on top of a mountaintop or ridgeline or whatever, whether it's, you know, you have 25 acres that's divided into 3 acres and 11 acre, whatever the numbers are. So I'm not seeing the value of doing this. And again, I don't want to downplay all the work that you guys have done, but I just am not ready to say, yeah, let's do this at this point.
So where does that leave us?
Split.
Well, there's 5, it can't be split.
Well, it could be a split vote, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's not even a vote at this point, it's just some, the planning commission is looking for some direction. And we have to give them that direction on this item right now.
Well, I think what I heard was general support with some concerns in the background.
I would hear it the other way.
Yeah, I think I hear it the other way too. There's a lot when you talk about fragmentation, and it's gonna be 5-acre lots. It costs you $1,000 a foot to put a road in. So if you try to break up a 100-acre lot into 10-acre lots, by the time you get done with the road, you can't afford to sell it anyway. The economics of fragmentation are really not there. You know, it's not, you can't afford to do it. The construction costs for a road or so extreme that you just can't do it.
That sounds like an argument for having the type of zoning that they want, which is
No,
small
because then
clusters on an existing road that's already there.
The problem,
I mean, that's what it sounds like.
With the land behind being
Yeah.
preserved.
Because you can't develop and you can't put a
yeah,
road.
but you can't, you can't get to the land behind. You drove along, if you went to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is where the zoning has been done, and you say, wow, I came down here to see the Amish farms. You can't even see them anymore. And even when you go on the secondary roads, you can't see them. They're all behind rows of houses that are right on the road. So trying to say that, well, we're gonna preserve the rural character because we're gonna put houses along the road where it's easy to build, you've pretty much made it inaccessible from what you want to see.
I don't think that's a fair comparison, but okay, I get your point.
So let's get back to where we have to make a decision. Peter, you're saying you would not go for the density-based zoning?
I would say no.
Ariana?
I'm feeling interested in the 3-acre minimum, but I like the concept of the density-based zoning. So I'm struggling, because I agree with the minimum lot, needing the minimum lot size to retain what it's been, but I do like the idea of,
Flexibility?
yeah,
Can I just throw one, there's another consideration here too, is it more affordable to build on a 2-acre? So if I wanted to build a house and I had the means to do that, and I could get a 2-acre lot for less than I could get a 3-acre lot, there's more likelihood I'm gonna build that house. And one of the things we're trying to solve for here is a housing shortage. So if we get a few more houses built, I think that's a positive thing. And that would be a potential, I think all of this is pretty abstract because we don't have anybody who's beating down the doors in Chester to subdivide land.
and I keep going through your experiment of 50 years from now, and you guys have all heard me say this. My concern is the individual who has a 200-acre lot right now learns about this, gets very excited, wants to develop it, so they've got septic that's in inopportune places in order to do this, but they own all of it, so it's fine. You look ahead 50 years, and the guy who bought the third house from the left has still got the septic from his neighbor on it. And yes, all those rules follow the piece of land, but that's the part where that's where I'm on the minimum lot size. I'm looking 50 years ahead. I'm looking to that unfortunate 30-year-old who just bought a house and didn't understand that their septic wasn't on their own property.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm,
Well, one thing about regulations like this, 50 years ahead, I think we'll be back at the table before that, or there'll be a planning commission
That's a
or a
good
board
point.
that's gonna be
That's a
discussing
good
these
point.
rules and regulations probably in about 3 or 5 years. Or if a development starts and something happens and it seems like, wow, this is a bad example of how these rules and regulations are being applied, you might have one development that doesn't make sense or works out, and you say you're gonna change it. Or the opposite could be that, wow, that worked really well in this little area. There's 4 little houses built up, there's a lot of area preserved, let's hope that happens again somewhere. But I agree, I don't think anybody's gonna be knocking down anybody's doors to do any housing these days at the price where it costs $400,000 to $500,000 to put up a house anywhere to do anything. And those issues and problems are beyond our control of what's happening with the economy and the middle class and the country in general. But, that being said, the question still becomes, how do you want to vote on, or what's the consensus of a 2-acre, the way they presented it with the 2 acres? Peter said no, you said it would be all right with 3.
2's fine with me.
2's fine.
I say no as well.
And I would say it's fine. So it's fine the way it is, whether it's 2 or 3 acres, we have to decide that. We don't have to decide that tonight, but it gives the planning commission some direction.
and many people have expressed, and we have all spoken often, about how much we wished the citizenry would engage from the beginning. I also need to respectfully say, the citizens want to wait and see and wait and see and wait and see, so the fact that people don't react until something is published is actually human nature, because they want to wait and see if it got better. So once it's published, that's when people react, and that's gonna be typical. If we were to poll the community specifically on this, I am not confident where they would land. And so, based on the dozen people we have here, the 5 of us, people we've spoken to on the street, I still come back to, I'm relatively rookie, but as far as the planning and zoning process for communities and all that stuff, all I've got to reference is the noise that went on in Londonderry, what we've experienced here this year and last, and then other anecdotal stories. And I just don't know what this means to our entire town if we move forward on something that is not necessarily universally appreciated.
Good point. Still not sure where to go.
Yeah. have another, but we have other, there's other elements of this. I know we're anxious to move on with our meeting, but I believe the planning commission has more to tell us beyond just the density-based zoning.
Well, no, I don't have any, I mean, we went through, if you've got other questions about what else was proposed, I'm open to those, but when we left the last public hearing, I got the sense that largely you were okay with the other changes we were proposing. but there
The
were-
only other outstanding question was one that Brian echoed, and that was the Treebo Road purple question.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, I'll say just a couple of more things on that, and I'll also share what I'm reading from the select board in terms of guidance and make a comment about that, and then I think I'll be done. In the areas that went from R120 to what we're calling residential 2, that was largely done because, A, most of the lots that we rezoned to Res 2 are small lots. 90% of those lots are under 2 acres already. Secondly, we changed some of the uses in residential 2 to be more residential-like. When you move out into R120, the uses that are in R120 are not all the same uses you would expect to see in a strictly more residential area. That was the driving motivation for what happened when you see the Res 2. So you can certainly dig into that deeper by looking at the draft bylaws and comparing uses. I don't have that right off the top of my head, but that was the driver. Now, as far as the density-based versus non-density-based, just to kind of put a pin in it from a planning commission point of view, and I heard some of it already tonight. If density-based zoning is not a concept that'll fly, and you say, no, we don't like that, if it's not broken, don't fix it, then that's useful guidance for the planning commission. However, if you were to say, we don't like density-based zoning, but we still want less development in the rural areas, if that's a message, then the flip side of that coin is, if you start changing R120 from min 3 to min 5, conservation residential from min 5 to min 10, then you're going to get the flip side of that. People are going to come and say, you're taking from me. My land used to be 2 lots on 10 acres, now you're telling me 1 lot on 10 acres. So you're going to have the same potential pushback. So for me, it almost feels like it's a take this approach because density-based allows the landowner to preserve some of that value because they have flexibility about where they put their building lots. Or if we say we're going to abandon density-based zoning, then my recommendation would be a do-nothing approach. R5, R3, button it up, let's go. So,
Thank you.
yep.
I think what's going to happen is I'm going to close this hearing, and we're going to have another, at our future select board meeting, we'll have it on the agenda for us to have a little bit more discussion on this, so we can figure out what kind of guidance we want to give the planning commission to go forward with this. That'll give us a little more chance to digest what's been said and what's been going on. It'll give the public a little more chance to comment with us, reach out to us, talk to us, see what's happening. We'll have a meeting as a select board, as an agenda item with this, and then we'll go back to the planning commission to help them out as far as the guidance, so they don't have to keep trying to guess what.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, at this point, I am going to close our hearing for our Unified Development Bylaws Amendment. I want to thank everyone for coming and offering their opinion and their comments. I want to thank the planning commission for all the work, and Jason, you too also. Thanks for everything, and we'll let you know how it all works out. Hopefully you'll be at our next meeting, and we'll be able to iron out these last few details that we have. And it's a big difference. It's a big change, and I think a lot of it is understanding, but we'll see how it works out. So the hearing is closed. If there's anybody that wants to take this chance to head out and leave because they don't want to stick around for the rest of the meeting,
I was going to suggest maybe a short recess, mainly because I left my water bottle out in the truck, and after all, thank you.
break.
No, I was, although we have some tweets we want to do, we'll see. I mean, we got a lot done. No, you were very right to bring that up. I wanted to bring that up, because it's just, if we just start taking value from the land, they're gonna be upset. Yeah. If that 8 acres was in a 10-acre zone, yeah, you would lose that.
Yeah. So how many other properties?
Oh, nervousness is normal, and I get nervous too, so.
But see, I think, I hope they,
It shouldn't be that serious,
I hope I
I just haven't eaten much today.
but we're kind of, we're just sort of saying that we got a lot of the changes we wanted in the earlier phases, and this time it's just the way it is. I'm not upset.
Sorry, I didn't realize.
always, to me, it just seems like.
It will. It will, and we actually made the PUD process a little bit easier, because a lot of people just look at it and say, oh my gosh. So it will. Okay, well, you're welcome.
Exactly. It's kind of funny.
All right, folks, we're going to, I guess we're going to start our meeting. Call our select board meeting to order. And any changes to the agenda, deletions, additions? Staying the same?
I have none.
I have none.
Nope. Nope.
And I need a motion about our select board minutes from September 18th.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from September 18th.
Second?
Leaves the motion, Ariana's the second. Anybody have any changes, corrections, additions, errors?
I do on page 13 of 13, line 1. Tunbridge should be spelled Tunbridge with an N instead of an M.
Nancy, not mother.
November, not, I don't know what that
Yeah,
is.
I don't know me.
Malibu?
That was the only change.
Anything else? Everybody else?
That was the only one I saw.
All those in favor of approving the minutes with that one change, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Next item on our agenda is citizens' comments. If there was someone here or on Zoom that would like to address the board regarding an issue that is not on the agenda, now would be the time to do so. Are there any citizens' comments?
Yes, can you hear me on your display?
Yes, we can.
Hang in a second, sir. Mr. McGinnis, is that who?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, sir.
Yes, good evening, chairperson, members, select board, town manager. This is Kirk McGinnis. I appreciate being able to speak with you about this class 4, road. What I've been seeing, is the town desires to improve public access to the natural resources up there at Wyman Falls. I believe that this proposed change constitutes a violation of my property rights. Specifically, the transformation of this road into a public trail would severely restrict my access to use of my land, creating what amounts to be a de facto landlock. Additionally, I have received no compensation for the public's increased usage and the resulting negative impacts on my property. I'd also like to add, my son Noah is listening, and you know, we're native Vermonters, we're local, so we and I'm trying to preserve. I'm with you with preserving the natural character of the landscape, and I kind of like the idea of a trail because I've been dealing with cheap caravans and a lot of people that have no compassion for the ancient stone walls and things like that, mudding right through the brook and stuff like that, taking the stones and throwing them into the brook. So I'm for the idea of preserving the nature, but the problem that I have is you're turning part of my driveway right into a nature trail that would block me out of my own property. And I have an upper property, and if you make the class 4 road a trail, then I'm landlocked from reaching my upper property. I have a camp up at the top of the hill there. So that's the initial problem that I have, and I wanted to bring that to the board's attention.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. Under citizens' comments, we're not going to really get into discussion on this topic. I understand your concerns about what's going on there, and I would really like to have your input when the conversation is regarding that specific item. At this point, the road that you're speaking of is a Class 4 road, and there are some ideas about what might happen to it, but before anything happens, I think what's going to be coming forward is reaching out to all the neighbors to get their input and get their ideas and get their considerations in place also. So if we could get your contact information, we'd love to have you have a discussion and talk with all the folks that are in that area before anything happens.
Well, certainly you have my contact information. You're collecting close to $3,000 a year from me for taxes.
All right, so we'll use that for contact, and
Well, I can give it to you here if you want it right now.
no, we have it. We have it, Mr. McGinnis.
I have it, Kirk.
Yeah. So, I would think Mr. Skowinski and some of the other neighbors would be concerned about that. It took me by surprise. I live down here in Florida, and I've been going through Hurricane Milton and Helene, and I'm watching you on my camera start cutting brush. Chairman there, take as though it's your property. And I didn't even know who you were. So it kind of rattled my cage down here in Florida.
No, I got that from the conversation that we had over the speakers that were there. The brush that was being cut was on the side of the road. It's the town right-of-way that goes through that. But like I said, we should have a discussion when this is a warned agenda item, and we could get into it a little more that way, and that way we could have a discussion between the public and the complete board here, and we'll make sure that you're well aware of anything that's going to be going on there. And we'll plan on getting out a letter to all the other neighbors in that area also.
Absolutely. I mean, if we're going to conduct it in a slow, methodical, legal way, and I am an American citizen, I should have some property rights, as should my neighbors. And I spoke with the town manager, and I know you don't want to have a discussion, but I'll just end my point on you talking about making a parking lot east of my mailboxes. And not only my mailboxes, but my neighbors' mailboxes. And that sounds like something that would be feasible or possible. But while you're telling me this, I see you in there clearing out, hiring down graders and tractors and stuff to cut the brush out of there. so I'm being told one thing and I'm watching another thing.
All right, Mr. McGinnis, we're going to, we'll continue this at a future agenda item or with you when we get to the point where we're going to be discussing what's happening there. And the items that
I'd
you
like
were.
to ask if my son might have anything to add, because he's the future of me. And, I heard you talking about where Chester will be 50 years from now, and maybe, I see he's on there. I'd like to see if maybe he'd like to weigh in. He's in Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, we're all set with you, Mr. McGinnis, thank you. And Mr. Allen, would you like to speak under citizens' comments? Mr. Allen, would you like to speak under citizens' comments? Is there anyone else that would like to speak under citizens' comments? Hearing none, we'll go on to our next agenda item, old business. Julie, can you take us through our old business list?
I can, update on solar field. Jim and I, as you know, have been talking about, going through all the documentation with Greenbacker. And we have come to the conclusion that we really need, an attorney representing the town, whose primary focus is municipal solar fields. So, we have contracted with David Gertman out of Jack Rock and Martin. He's out of the Rutland office. This is what they do. Solar companies in the state use them, and they're very, very familiar with the municipal side of this. So, David is currently, or Attorney Gertman, I should say, is currently going through the plethora of information that Greenbacker sent, and will be getting in touch with me when he's done with that review, and he will come before the board, obviously in an executive session, to talk about concerns, what the process would be for the town to own the solar field, all those types of things. So stay tuned for that. Jim feels a little more comfortable moving us in this direction, as do I. So Class 4 roads, just a reminder that there's going to be an executive session next Thursday for the board, meeting with Jim Carroll regarding Bailey Hill. And then just to put out there, I mean, we're starting to do some advertising on the fact that the town is working on the municipal budget. So there'll be something in the newsletter about that and some Facebook posts. We've talked about trying to get a little more involvement in our budget process. So November 6th, the budgets will be administration, zoning, listers. November 20th, recreation and facilities. December 4th will be highway and cemeteries, and then December 18th will be water and wastewater. So just a reminder on that. That's all I have for old business.
Anybody on the board, anything on old business? I just want to reiterate about the Class 4 roads thing. This is a discussion that had started almost a year ago in general about all the Class 4 roads in this town, whether they're Wyman's Falls or whether they're Bailey Hill or whatever. And it started because of a question from a landowner on whether a Class 4 road was thrown up or not. And there's been a lot of work and a lot of interest in trying to get that resolved. And that is what basically was the spark for discussion of all our Class 4 roads in this town. And this discussion has been going on for almost a year now, and it probably will be going on for a little bit longer. I just wanted to get that out so people are aware that this is just not something that just popped up recently. No other old business? Go on to our next agenda item, which is our reappraisal compliance plan. I guess it's going to be reappraisal time, and it's a complete reappraisal?
Yes, the listers are proposing a complete reappraisal. We would be working with Ed Clodfelter. Again, Ed has done reappraisals for the town of Chester in the past. This is a reappraisal that would start in 2027, complete in 2029. And as I had indicated in your packet, the state sends money every year to municipalities for the purpose of funding reappraisals down the road. So by the time this reappraisal begins, the funding will be there. So this is not a cost that, certainly the whole cost won't affect the tax base. Very minimal amount would actually affect the taxes. So what the board need, or what the listers need, and they can certainly say more if they want to, but what the listers need is a signature on this plan that we have to submit to the state by early November.
So,
Yep. Yep, they're here. Yep. Both documents are here, Kathy.
Right,
yes.
okay.
Yep.
so you said that this is something that the listers want to do, or?
No,
is-
it's,
No.
we have to do.
It's a
Okay,
requirement of
that's
the
what I
state.
wanted to
No, we don't wanna
clarify.
do it.
Requirement of the state.
Yeah, okay. And is this something that we would do on this time frame, or are we being pushed in a direction we don't necessarily?
So our general appraisal rate is quite a bit lower than market rate and so we need some kind of revision. And it's kind of a moot point to worry about whether we would do it if it weren't for state education funding. But we need to revise it. And this was the earliest we could get anyone to say they were available to do it. And might as well mention that there's a discussion, a plan, a project going on at the state level to come up with a different way to appraise towns. So we're doing this because we're under orders and we have to do something. And I would be very surprised if we actually do this in 2027, but we need to go through the motions now.
Because they're going to change how it has to be done
It-
before we
likely.
have a chance to do it.
It seems likely,
Potentially.
yeah.
There's a lot going on in the legislature. If you will recall, about 6 weeks ago, we came before you to say that we had to develop a plan and this was coming. So we're here.
At that time, we discussed whether you could do a statistical reappraisal or a physical reappraisal.
Correct.
And this was determined to do it this way because,
So Ed Clodfelter did not want to do a simple statistical. He wanted to do an inventory and then adjust the cost tables we use and the land tables and, and turn the crank and come up with new values for everybody. And that's, when we hire an expert, you listen to the expert.
sorry, that hearing's already closed.
So,
Biting my tongue.
yeah, it may, it certainly could change, but we need to act, plan for this. If nothing happens, this is what we're going to have to do in 2027.
And so there's no point in doing a statistic. My take on it was statistical was a quicker way to do it and less expensive.
Right, but they're not willing to do that.
And that's the consultant that's not.
Well, he works for the company that writes and maintains the software that we use to maintain the grand list.
He may feel that our inventory is not solid. There may be a
Right.
feeling that the inventory is not up to date enough, would be my guess.
Okay.
Did we just lose it? No, not necessarily.
Yep. Upgrade the
That's just information, yeah. So, so we have to go through the motions, and we'll do the best we can with what
Yeah,
comes.
I'm just kind of poking the bear at this point.
Well, let me just add one comment to that. In that discussion with the vendor, we asked them, can we do a statistical reevaluation rather than a full reevaluation? And he said, based on the disparity that currently exists between Chester's assessed value and market value, the state will not accept a statistical reevaluation.
That's what I
So,
was looking for.
so that was, because we thought if we could do that, that would be a way to get it done quicker at a lower cost. So we asked for that. And, his opinion was, that's really not going to fly with the state based on where you're at. I suppose there could have always been a scenario where Chester says, we want to do a statistical reevaluation, then we wait for the state to come back and say, no, that's not good enough, give us another proposal. Rather than going through those motions, our feeling is put the plan out there, so that we get off the list. Like right now, we're on the list with the state that said you owe us a plan by November 15th, understanding that it's not going to start until 2027. In between now and then, there's so much potential for change with what's happening at the state level that we'll figure it out.
Okay, that's more than explains. I was just wondering the difference in cost and timing, so thank you.
So Kathy, when something like that happens, is this all because of the common level of appraisal, the CLA? They drop below 80 or whatever?
Yeah, they track our sales versus our appraisal or assessments, and when they're too far apart, then it's, this feeling is that it's not fair to the other towns in the state.
When was the last appraisal?
It finished in 2020, I think, 2018 to 2020.
Finished pre-COVID, it was pre-COVID.
Right, just, yeah.
Any other questions? You don't need any action on
No, you need to sign the
Just
contracts.
sign,
You need to sign the contracts, and there's 2 copies. You want me to send the whole contract? 2 copies, but please sign both. And this was in your packet. We have to provide a copy of the contract.
So, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So in effect, if you asked for a statistical reappraisal and the state didn't turn you down, then you would be getting the CLA more in line and lowering taxes here earlier. Quicker, yeah. Is that correct?
Appraisal does not necessarily mean taxes are lowered, so.
No, what I'm saying, what I'm saying though is if you put the CLA closer to 1, it's going to have less of the CLA multiplier effect or divider effect than it would as it stands now.
Correct, that's the purpose of a reappraisal.
Right, but if asking for a statistical and having the state say yes, would that bring that would bring the CLA down or up sooner? You see what I'm saying?
While that may be true, when we talk to the vendor, regardless of whether we did statistical or full, they would not be able to engage any sooner based on their resource plan, so.
Would they be able to finish sooner?
possibly.
Yeah, I think what's driving the schedule primarily is resources to get them started, but then also they're bound by the state mandated grievance period. So grievances can only be heard certain times a year, regardless of how fast you do the work and how fast you're trying to get something done. So they basically said the rigid state mandated grievance window is really what drives the ability to get things done more quickly. In addition to the fact that there's only a small number of firms that are certified to do this work in Vermont, and they're also backlogged that they can't start, so.
Got all the signatures on it? All set? Any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is a request for using some funds from town coffers for upstairs at Town Hall. It's a group of folks that have been doing some fantastic projects upstairs at the Town Hall, music shows, poetry events, and they're trying to get off the ground a little bit, and they're looking for a little bit of seed money so they can go through the process of making a 501c to be able to accept donations. And we have a few folks here that would be willing to speak to the group that's there, and some of their ideas and some of their goals. I think it would be a great use of funds for the town, especially coming out of the marketing budget to help with the upstairs. It's part of our community. I think it's definitely a plus to have everything going on and what's happening there. They've had some great shows, and they just need a little help and a little seed money to start on the way. And Robert, would you like to speak a little bit for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
Did we get a document in support of this request?
Just in the manager's memo or something.
Okay, great.
There was
Yeah.
a, oh, yeah.
So to Arnie's point, upstairs at Town Hall is essentially an informal group of community volunteers that have been working to bring cultural events, arts events, community events to the space upstairs. So far, we have had, as Arnie mentioned, we have had the poet laureate here reading from his book and doing a book signing. We've had open mics for teens, try to encourage them to come out, and particularly aspiring young musicians and dancers and singers, to have an opportunity to perform in front of a welcoming audience, to kind of encourage them to pursue what they wanted to pursue. And we had a remarkably successful event that I think, Ariana, you coined the phrase, a proof of concept, which it really felt like. We had a world-class, literally world-class group of jazz musicians presenting a performance. We think it was really, really successful. We filled the room. We had fantastic feedback from people in the audience. And I think what stood out to me is in that audience were people from Putney, from Andover, from Dummerston. So I think it generally illustrated that this can become a really professional, legitimate performance space, and we can attract people to the community. We have a next event coming up on November 9th. We have the Vermont Symphony Orchestra String Quartet, which again is our world-class musicians, and I think it's going to be a remarkable program. They're going to do a program called Bach to the Beatles, where the string quartet is going to perform both classical music and popular music in the style of a string quartet. The goal is to be able to bring events to town that are unique, and in many cases, people in our community wouldn't be able to see those kinds of performances unless they got in the car, put gas in the car, and they went to Keene or they went to Brattleboro or Weston. We want to make this a hub for those kinds of cultural events. And the second part of that is we want to be able to make it accessible to everybody in the community. So admission has been by donation, and we'd like to maintain that. So everybody has an opportunity to see these performances. And I think we've proven that we can get some pretty remarkable events here in this space, which underscores how great that space is upstairs, because it's absolutely beautiful. I've spoken to the director of the Vermont Jazz Center, who we worked with to get that last performance, and his feedback was there was a consensus among his musicians that it was, quote, a beautiful night, meaning they really felt the interaction with the audience. That's the same kind of feedback that we got from the people we talked to in the audience, and they said they'd be very willing to come back anytime. So that could be a performance that we have annually, for instance. When we were making the arrangements with the Vermont Symphony Orchestra, we made a pitch, we sent a bunch of photographs, we talked about what we're doing, what our plans are, and the director, their program director, is actually coming to the performance because she said, I think this might be a place where we can perform often. So she's really anxious to see the space. So that's where we are. We're dependent on amazing volunteers who work really, really hard. And most of the logistics and the support and the lighting and the sound is all done by volunteers, and they're amazing. But the catch-22 is, to get this kind of quality of performance, we have to pay people to do that. As an example, the string quartet, they're union musicians, and they get paid union rates, so they're getting paid what they're worth, and so we have to come up with that kind of money. Up until now, with the exception of some donations, we've been self-funded, and that's obviously not sustainable over the long term. So the second half of the catch is, in order for us to go out and solicit underwriters and supporters and donors, we have to have some mechanism, some entity. And right now, we're a group of hardworking locals who are just get together to do this. So as Arnie mentioned, we're going to have to incorporate it as a nonprofit. We're going to have to get an EIN number. We're going to have to become a 501c3. So then we can go out and solicit businesses and individuals to underwrite these events. And I think it's going to be entirely possible for us to do that, but we have to exist in some formal form. And since we are just volunteers and we're self-funding, if we could get some help to go through that process, become an entity, and then help us, pay for like the next event a little bit, it would be wonderful. And it would really give us a boost. And I think we can continue the momentum that we've started so far. So we would appreciate at least your consideration of helping us at this point. We're not talking about a lot of money, and I think it's fair to tell you what the kind of typical costs are, for instance. If we look at the first two important events we had, the first one and the one we're going to have, and some of the other events we're looking at. For example, we've been in negotiation with a modern dance company over in Albany, which is a really high-level modern dance company. They have tentatively agreed to come over here and put on an original performance in the round upstairs on the floor. And it would be a remarkable, intimate experience for the community to see the dancers, to listen to the music. So if you take a look at those three performances, they would range between $1,300 and $2,500 per performance. So that's kind of the range that we're looking at. It's not a tremendous amount of money. And I believe that once we get rolling, we can get that covered by underwriters and donors. So any help you would think about, consider, would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Ron. To me, it's part of the spirit of that space that's upstairs. Go ahead, Renee.
Okay. Hey. I'm Renee, and I'm a hardworking, awesome volunteer. Hang on. You hear that? No, you don't hear that, but we could be hearing applause, and we could be hearing people coming in and out, and we will, with your help. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
When we first went for a lot of the funds to remodel that upstairs, the town hall upstairs, that big space, and those were some of the dreams that we had about that being used by the community, sharing it with people, having performances, having movies, having dances there and everything else. And it seems like it's getting used more and more so. And a lot of it is because of the dedication of the town to put money into it and to make sure that it was a type of space that we can use it for that. It has a long way to go, and I think something like these shows that are coming up would be stepping stones for future grants that come along too. Because a lot of times in grants they have requests, have you done anything, what's going on, what are your plans? And when you have some kind of a history that's already in place, that's already been, like you were saying, a proof of concept, and you've done it, and it's continuing, and it's popular, I think it'll help the town in the long run as far as perpetuating this so that it becomes a seasonal event, a yearly event, or how many times or whatever, and it gets to be known as it gets more popular and stuff. The funds that we have, I believe we have, what, $5,000?
Yeah, we do have funds within the marketing line within the 2024 general fund budget, which is where I would propose that you take from. There are no plans for those funds at this time, so it's a one-time expense. It makes sense to take it from that location.
So what's the request amount?
$2,000, I believe.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Looking at the wrong one.
So nobody's mentioned that there's a potential economic impact from bringing world-class performances to Chester too. That makes me wonder, is the Economic Development Fund something that we could look to, maybe if not for this round, but something in the future? Because
you certainly could in the future going forward. I mean, you could have conversations about that. This is like a one-time request. You can have funds within the general fund. It's easier.
Yeah, I get that.
To just draw from that. But certainly going forward, there is a request that I will be bringing to you guys at some point for economic development funds for the electrical upgrade that we tried to get grant funded but can't seem to quite get there. It doesn't ever like rise to the top, and we've tried a few times. So the work can be done with an outside electrician, but the assistance of our staff, of town staff that we're already paying for. So they're working on a cost of what that would be, so I'll be coming to you with that, probably in the next meeting or two. Probably we'll discuss actually when you discuss facilities, when Steve is here. So, yeah, that is certainly gonna be part of a conversation that's coming to you for long term.
Right.
Great.
I feel like marketing is the logical place. I think supporting it is great, and I think expecting to be reviewing it next year for other ways to support it is what we should be looking at.
I don't need a motion.
Because it's already in a fund
Great.
that's set up for these type of
Great.
expenses, it was more
Great.
for information.
Totally not for this appropriate meeting, but I'm leaving town. I have 50 linear feet of very heavy IFR drapery that's 11 feet tall, so it's the right height. It could wrap the entire stage if your quartet wants to perform on the stage. So I need to get it into someone else's truck and out of my storage unit. I'll call you tomorrow.
Okay, and the timing is perfect because we're having a work day on Monday to work on the stage.
You'll be hanging heavy-duty velour drapes.
Perfect, thank you.
So-
And if I could say just quickly,
Wow.
30 years.
Not tonight.
This would not, even thinking about this wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the vision of the town to restore that amazing space, because it is an incredible, incredible space. And people from other towns said to us, we didn't even know this exists, and this is fantastic. So that's where the thanks goes to, is the fact that the town of Chester has done this.
I am in full support of this. The question I have, it relates to the new organization you're going to set up and the mission statement and plans, because I only mentioned plans. The question I have, not for you guys, but for us as a town, is do we have any policy or anything that relates to what that space is used for?
No, that is one of the things that as we're starting to get events, now that this room is set up, that is one of the, hopefully it won't take as long as personnel policy, but yes. It will.
Okay.
Yes, that is, we need to develop a policy for the use of all town,
Yeah.
not just town halls.
Okay.
It's been pretty much open. I mean, a lot of different groups come in to use that space, whether it's aerobics or wrestling or a swap meet or music or dances. But having a policy in place makes it a little more clear cut on exactly a procedure that has to work and has to go through to use that space for whatever event that might be considering at the time. I think it's a fantastic idea. I mean,
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I have just a question, just out of curiosity, how are the acoustics?
The acoustics are much better now that we have the panels up there.
Yeah.
And I think if we had some additional curtains, and probably ultimately up in the balcony as well, because a lot of the sound goes up and comes back.
Yep.
But it's pretty good. That concert was really, really nice. Yeah. And the musicians were happy with it, because, you know, they get a certain amount of feedback as well, and they really liked it.
There was a gentleman that walked into the room and gave a big yell and said, "Oh, this sounds pretty good."
That's right. That's the musician
It was a test, I guess.
That's,
So Robert, you can let me know who to make the check out to, like, as you get going in
Okay.
that process.
sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for your time.
Thank you.
You're having the easiest part of the meeting.
Come on up, guys.
When is the Vermont Symphony, the quartet?
When is it? November 10th.
That's going to be a fantastic show.
Oh, yeah, it's gonna
That
be
really
exciting.
is. In an intimate setting like
I
that.
think so.
It's a Sunday night, I believe.
It's a Sunday, yes.
Let me look at that. Yeah, it is a ten, sorry.
Thank you, scared me.
Thanks, Ted. Next item is a budget review for our Public Safety Department. Gentlemen, thanks for your patience. It's only been 2 hours since this meeting started, and you've been patiently
They've
waiting.
had an extremely long day.
And we have our 3 chiefs here, Michael Ranzio, Scott Richardson, and Tom Williams. And this time of year is when we go through the budget, and we look at what's happening by different departments. Julie, can you help us out with this?
have before you the first round of the combined public safety budget. This budget includes police, fire, ambulance, and communications. We are seeing overall, there are a few modifications that need to be made to this as I look at the capital plan and those types of things. And we are still waiting, actually I just received them today, our final insurance rates, so you'll see those increases in there as well. But you will see overall, combined public safety is actually, at this point, is down $4,000. And a big part of this has to do with, as was presented when we talked to you about the implementation of a transfer service from the ambulance, this is a revenue source that helps carry public safety as a whole. The other thing is the chiefs have worked very hard, as you will find from all department heads, are working very hard to keep their expenses as low as they possibly can. We understand we are all taxpayers as well. We understand greatly that nobody wants to see increases in taxes. We are working very hard to make sure that the overall budget lands at least the rate of inflation, hopefully below. That is our goal. But as we are all seeing in our own budgets, municipality is seeing increases as well. But with these three departments as well as communications, we're content, we're happy with where this stands, and I think even with the added health insurance rates and the capital, we're not going to see a dramatic increase.
So I'd like to say, Chief Ramsey, I've watched this with the ambulance go like, well, we really don't know. Where is it, back and forth, high and low, and this is, you've done a great job. That you picked something up that was kind of in pieces and put it together, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, I appreciate it.
It's amazing to look at a budget with all the services that you guys provide and the rest of the departments and stuff, and actually see a decrease in it. That's unheard of in this time, in this day and age, with the rising cost of things and the professionalism that you bring to the services that you represent and what's going on. We're lucky in this town as far as to have the type of services that we have going on in this town. And I've heard it from other people. You hear it from everybody all the time, which is just the feather in you guys' cap and everything that's going on in the background and stuff. It's hard to have any problems with a budget when it actually has gone down.
Well, and it's not so much the budget that's gone down that you found revenue.
Yeah, the revenues.
The revenue. That's really good, because budgets never go down. It just costs you more every year. And then particularly you guys are all in an environment where the federal government comes down or the state comes down and says, you've got to have this. And to be seeing this is for me, is very impressive. Thank you.
It was part of a discussion that we had years ago as far as the revenues and from the different areas and stuff, and it's all coming to fruition, because back then it was just, not speculation, there were hopeful guesses and stuff, but you weren't sure. You weren't sure how it was all going to work out, and it seems like it is. It's fantastic.
New ambulance will be arriving next week.
Yeah, next week or two, yes.
Okay. And once that is here, Mike will get everything switched over and outfitted and all of that, and then the old ambulance will be put into play to start with the transfers. So then we'll actually start seeing exactly what the revenue will be. We have budgeted on the revenue side, we believe, pretty conservative.
Yep.
So we feel confident that we will land where we have budgeted. Probably will exceed, but we did not want to be overzealous with that budget number. So this is a very conservative revenue budget line.
I don't need to take up time just reiterating what these guys have all said, but I did actually read every line of this, which I haven't had the opportunity to do lately, and I deeply appreciate how thorough and precise you guys are. These are not just big fat round numbers. It's clear you've worked through them, and looks good. So thank you.
It's one thing when you look at government budgets and stuff, when you look at something that's itemized like this, where everything is explained and everything's pretty clear cut, and if there's any question, you could easily ask, but it's all there. There's nothing hidden, everything's spelled out the way it's gonna be used, and it's very helpful when people say, well, where's my tax money going? It's pretty obvious where it's going, and it's easy to see, and it's helpful.
Did you guys have anything you wanted to share with us, having gone through this process? I'm hoping you feel good about the document you've submitted.
Yeah, I think we're just going to keep doing what we're doing and trying to find different ways and keep growing and strengthening our own departments, especially as there's changes like Act 167 could potentially be a hurdle, but talking with Julie, we have some ideas of how to get ahead of that and put our names kind of out there. So if there's any future funding, especially for community health, we're kind of already kind of in people's heads.
Good.
In case anybody does not know, Act 167 is?
I don't know the full name of it, but the Green Mountain Care Board just released the results of a study they did on all healthcare in the state of Vermont, which will also impact Medicaid and Medicare rates. Kind of their three major findings was more affordable housing, consolidation of some hospitals and different specialty services that are offered, as well as regionalization and professionalization of the EMS field. So for me, keeping our department professional and growing will hopefully help us in the long term, especially if the state does start to go down that regionalization path.
Thank you.
And the other nice thing to note is that Chief Ranzio has started his paramedic.
Yay!
Within a year, Chief Ranzio will be a paramedic.
Excellent. Thank
One
you,
thing I was going
gentlemen.
to add to that too is what Mike just said too. We do our individual things within our departments because that's what we get paid for. But we also do it as a group sitting together at the kitchen table having a coffee. How do we get this piece done as public safety, not as the PD, not as the ambulance? How do we as a group get it done? And it seems to work a little bit better going at it from a team approach than it does
Keeping it
individuals
siloed.
I'm trying to maintain my department, and I could go to Scott and say, how do I do this, or can I get some help? I mean, it's not really that clear cut that we're going to take money from the fire department or anything like that, but if we operate under the same umbrella, instead of having three individual departments that could have a budget up to here, you have one umbrella over it, Department of Public Safety, and we kind of help each other out with what we need.
It's great.
Love the collaboration, that's great.
Any other questions?
I'm just going to brag about myself.
Yeah.
Brag about my staff.
Well-
It's very easy to be a town manager in a town where you have amazing staff. So, I appreciate them making me look good.
Well, and it bears mentioning, you don't ever let us be surprised. And I deeply appreciate that. When we get to budgeting, usually most of what we see in here is something that either chiefs have come and told us about or you've made us aware of, and that makes our job easier. So thank you.
Gentlemen, thanks for your patience, hanging in there.
Was it worth the wait?
Did you want to talk a little more? They've had a very long day.
Seems like it,
They've had a very long day today.
If you guys want to head out, go right ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Yeah,
for
thank you.
all that you do every day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Personnel policy. I guess, Julie, you were saying that instead of redlining the old one and
Oh, my God.
redacting everything, it wasn't worth it, so
Not
you went
even
just for a
possible.
whole new one.
We did. So,
This has been in the works for a while.
This has been in the works for a long time. This is not expected that you would adopt this tonight. We'll put it
That's
on.
good.
We'll put it on for, the plan was to put it on for November 6th. Huh?
I read the whole thing.
Good for you. That'll make November 6th very quick and
questions
easy.
and stuff.
Yeah.
No, well, that was the main thing I have after line by line, and I've dealt with a lot of personnel policies. Can I work here?
So what you will notice in this policy, I did make a few notes. So there is nothing in here as far as full-time benefits. There are no ads. So this is what town employees currently have. The purpose of rewriting the policy was not to add benefits. The purpose was because we had a personnel policy from 2012. And as you can well imagine, way out of compliance with state law. So much of what we were having to actually implement and do was not even in our policy. So we were really in some gray areas, right? So we hired, if you remember, we hired Teresa Mealy. She is an HR specialist for the private sector, but in the past few years she has started transferring over and guiding municipalities in HR work as well. This is her template that Lori and I worked with her through on. I'm very pleased with it. It's much more professional. Lori and I learned a whole lot and kind of scared ourselves a little bit about like what we didn't know, and
So yay for.
but by the grace of God, we have not gotten into trouble. So anyway, I'm content with this. What this policy does add is some prorated benefits. It recognizes regularly scheduled part-time employees. So one of the things that Chester does not draw well are part-time employees because we've never had part-time employee benefits. So employees in municipal government that work regularly scheduled 24 hours, we are required by law to pay municipal retirement for them. That's a requirement under Vermont law. So we use that threshold to say we have currently two employees that are 24 hours. And it would be nice to be able to give prorated benefits. Those benefits include things like, PTO, the paid time off. There are some prorated, there's a prorated health insurance cost. Chester has an opt-out option. And so what it does is it allows them to have access to that opt-out option. As long as they can prove they have health insurance somewhere else, they can get 40% of the premium paid to them. So it gives them some type of a benefit, but doesn't require the town to also keep them onto our policy, so it's not anywhere near as expensive for the town. The hope is that by having some part-time benefits, in the future we can draw part-time employees that are obviously less expensive for the town. The other thing, the big thing that this policy does is it switches us over to PTO. Chester, the quantities don't change. Well, actually, the quantities go down. Currently, we have vacation, personal, sick time for employees. It's a nightmare to manage. And vacation and personal time can be paid out upon termination or separation with the town. Sick time doesn't. So you've got these stupid, I have 1,800 hours of accumulated sick time. If I leave tomorrow, I'm not paid out for those hours. It's very clear. So what's the point, right? So what we were finding is that a lot of employees don't use their sick time. And so what we did is when we merged the bucket into one PTO bucket, we removed 16 hours of sick time. Well, I'm sorry, 40 hours of sick time. What we did do, because what we were finding is at the end of every year, people had about 80 hours of sick time at a minimum left over. And so it's accumulating these balances. So what we have all agreed to is we remove 40 hours of sick time into your PTO bucket, but at the end of the year, I'm going to let you do something with 3 weeks, or 120 hours versus 80 hours. Currently, at the end of the year, you can do something with 80 hours. You can roll 80 into the following year. You could pay out 40 and roll 40. Now I'm going to let you do something with 120 with a maximum of still only paying out 40. So it does not have a budget impact at all. I formed, when we started this, when we got a first real draft, I kind of formed a committee within our employees. No department heads allowed. This was all staff, or, understaffed, that met with me, one from each department. And just to make sure there were going to be no real issues, I wanted to know them up front. Everybody understood this is not for the purpose of adding benefits. This is for the purpose of getting a policy that makes sense and works, because the current one doesn't. Everybody is on board with this policy. The goal is that hopefully you will adopt on November 6th. We have an employee benefits day on November 13th. It's mandatory for all full-time staff. All of our benefit providers will be here for them to get onboarded in all kinds of things. And I will be reviewing this new policy with them at that time, and they will all sign off that they accept the terms of the policy. So again, no budgetary impact here, other than small dollars for those 2 24-hour regularly scheduled employees, which will have an impact of a couple $1,000.
See, I was impressed because you go back to the harassment stuff that you have in here, the computer use you have in here, the cell phone use that you have in here. Well, no, but you do have it all there. You don't, I mean, it's in there. That's, yes, you have to have it in there, but you put it all in there.
Yeah.
You know, so it's, you caught yourself up to date. And that was, I was more impressed with that than it was anything else.
You know, the police have their own contract.
The police have a union agreement for union employees. There are employees at the police
Yep.
department that are not union.
Right, yeah.
Are they happy with it? Would they ever consider coming back just to the town policy, or is it something that doesn't go the other way?
It doesn't usually go the other way very easily. They are, I think the staff that you have at the police department now, their only reasoning for wanting that union agreement is protection if a call goes south. The union defends them. And that is why police departments unionize for the most part. And there's an element of you want that. You want that protection. It protects the town as well. The union, so far, I have not really had many issues with. There have been things as we've worked through our first agreement that have been like, this doesn't make any sense. So we've done some minor adjustments and tweaks to it, where we just all agree to clarify language, those types of things. We will begin negotiation for the next round, probably halfway through next year. I am not aware of any big asks at this point. I will say that what is in this union agreement and what all other municipal employees get are pretty much the same, because I made sure of that. One department is not more valuable to me than any other department. They all work equally as hard. So we made sure of that when we did those union agreements, and I will work very hard to ensure that is the same going forward.
Nice. Do you need anything from us on this?
At this point, no, unless you have major questions that are like, you need to look into this, why did you do that? It would just give me time between now and November 6th. But-
So we should read it and direct questions to you?
Yes, please. And Lee
I have read it.
Lee is my phenomenal editor, so he went through and found a bunch of stuff, which I was very thankful for. There are some things in there that were like open-ended, so what I can do is send you a revised,
Please.
the most up-to-date with all those
Yes.
grammatical things.
That would be helpful.
and
You mean-
Because I'll hang up on that stuff too.
Which I appreciate.
Then we won't all have to mark the.
Right.
boxes.
Correct.
Oh, no,
So
yeah. Typo.
I will send you a revised copy, yeah.
Have to put them in.
Yeah,
I can't write or
you have to make the errors so that we can find them.
just a quick one, there's a residency requirement for our employees?
Distance, yes.
The distance, it's response,
Oh, it's
yes.
distance, it's not residency.
No.
It's
It's
response,
distance, response
yes.
time.
For highway, you have to be able to, in highway and
Yeah.
emergency services, you have to be able to respond because they're on call.
Okay. And I wasn't sure whether that
Yeah.
was, I didn't realize it was a
It's a
distance.
distance.
Distance, yeah.
Yeah, you have to live within a distance.
It was a rainy Sunday, I read the whole thing.
I appreciate that, thank you, so deeply, I appreciate that.
Any other concerns or questions regarding the personnel policy? Guess we,
Nothing glaring at this point? Okay, I'll send out the revised,
No.
kind of most up to date and.
next item is a liquor license for the Stoneheart Eatery.
So we have two of those?
You have two, I sent you another one, it's advertised as a Stoneheart, so we're fine. They have an outside consumption as well.
Okay.
And neither one of them require signature, they just require a motion. Both of them require a motion.
Can we motion them both at the same time?
Sure.
So I'll make a motion to approve the outdoor consumption permit and the first-class restaurant bar license for the Stonehearth Eatery.
Second.
Lee's the motion, Ariana's the second. Any discussion on it? good to see a lot of cars parked out front there these days.
This weekend, yeah,
A
it
lot
was
of
busy.
groups, a lot of activity. They did great at the town fair. They seem like they're really taking on.
Yeah, it was
Just a
kind of-
lot happening.
Kind of
And
a
it's
slow
great
start,
addition.
but it's really, seems to be taking off.
Yeah, that's great, because it was empty for a while, and they had a hard year to get going and stuff. That place needed a lot.
They put a lot into it.
They did, they did. Any other further discussion? All those in favor of approving those two licenses, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? No? New business, future agenda items.
So we will have budget.
Gonna have that class 4 Bailey's Hill.
That's on the 24th. That's on the 24th, but your next regular select board meeting, you will have administration, zoning, and listers for budget. Will be here. There was something else.
We'll
I
put the
can't remember what it was.
discussion regarding the planning commission.
The planning
The
commission
UDVs,
discussion,
yeah.
correct? I've got that on here.
Anybody else have anything?
Housing commission will be at the second meeting in November, the 20th.
Okay,
They will be presenting.
good. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, they've got some great stuff.
Good.
So they'll be presenting some stuff about establishing our next thing is a housing trust, so that there can actually be funds. You don't want those running from the general fund. So that there can be ways to fund a housing trust that will then have the ability to fund housing projects.
Fund itself.
Correct.
Right.
And lots of ways to do that, but they just want to kind of get your pulse before they start going down too many rabbit holes.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. It's exciting.
All right. Next item?
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Lee's the motion, Tim's the second.
That was Peter, was it second?
Peter, that was
Peter
Peter.
was
Oh,
the
yeah,
second.
I'm ready to go home. Are you kidding? It's been a long day myself.
Yeah.
All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.